One of my little rituals that I have to do is every couple of weeks I have to go for for 3 allergy shots. I get a schedule and I have to show up, and it doesn't matter what time of year it is. I have to go and get it. So, of course, almost forgot over Christmas, but on Friday I had to go downtown to get these 3 shots. It's a thick serum that they give you, and so it takes a little while to get it in, or else it really hurts. And so you've got the nurse sitting beside you for a little while, and usually you can get to talking a little bit, and this week was no different. It wasn't a nurse that I'd had a number of times. I'd had her a couple times, but we hadn't talked a lot. And so we sat there, and she sat and, started working on my arms, and we started to talk. And the first thing she said was that and I have no idea who we was, but she said, we aren't doing resolutions this year. We're picking a word. I said, well, that's interesting. I said, yeah, we're picking a word that we want to characterize us for 2023. And she paused, and I just sat there listening as she's sticking a needle in my arm. She said, my word for 2023 is going to be gratitude. I thought, well, that's a good word. She goes, I'm not sure how this is all going to work out. I said, yeah, neither am I. But I'm going to try to find things in everything that I can be grateful about. And then she went on to tell me a story of her granddaughter, who happens to be 12 years old. I can kind of connect because I have a granddaughter who happens to be 10 years old. But her 12-year-old granddaughter is into ski racing. She doesn't just like to go down the side of the mountain. She wants to go down the side of the mountain fast. And she has an app that tells her the elevation she's at and how fast she gets down the hill, what her top speed was. And she's really excited. So she checks all of her runs on this app as she races down the side of a mountain. And once over this Christmas break, she was on a local mountain, I'm assuming up in Jasper, although she had been down in the Banff area as well. And so she got to the top of the mountain, and in her haste to get down to the bottom as fast as she could, she crashed. And I guess it was a pretty good crash. It was a fairly spectacular crash. And she got up, and I guess one of the ski patrol came over and said, did you hit something? And she said, yes, my face hit the side of your mountain. And so they got her down, but before they got her down, somebody who was riding up on the ski lift looked down and saw the whole crash happen and yelled down to her, gnarly crash, dude. She gets down to the bottom of the mountain, and she talks to her grandmother, and what she's upset about is not that she crashed, not that she chipped a tooth, not that she's now in concussion protocol and can't go back on the mountain until she's been cleared by a doctor, but that some idiot on a ski lift called her dude. And she was upset. And her grandmother, as she's still putting her the needles into my arm, goes, I'm just grateful that she made it to the bottom, that she's okay. And I said, yeah, we can usually find something to be grateful about. I'm grateful that the worst thing that happened was somebody called her dude. What would your word be? I've been trying to think of mine. Unfortunately, gratitude's a pretty good one. And it's one that we don't often give out very easily. We aren't very thankful with the people who are around us. Not as thankful as we sometimes should be. We're going to talk a little bit about New Year, and we're going to start by taking one short passage out of Colossians. And I've admitted that I really don't like New Year's Eve, because New Year's Eve is usually a time for me to reflect on all the stuff I didn't do last year, which can get kind of depressing. But I have to admit, there's something neat about this morning. about getting up on January 1st and knowing that you've got a clean slate ahead of you, that you can just kind of forget about everything that 2022 was and say, you know what, I can do things differently this year. I can change some things this year. And I've talked to you, and most of you, I have a theory, and please do not try to talk me out of my theory. I have a theory that most of us make resolutions, we just don't tell anybody. We say we don't. There's always something that we want to improve on, but we're not going to tell people, because if it doesn't happen, well, then we got to own up to it. So whatever your resolution is, whatever my resolution is, we've got a clean slate to try to do something with it. And the best way to get it done usually is by making sure that it's something that you can do kind of every day. You can get it into the habit of doing it. Get into the habit of praying or an attitude of gratitude. Whatever it is that is important to you, you can do it. Just start small and start now and work through it. You've got 365 days before you get to the last, and you have to figure out why you didn't get there. But so today is kind of a special day. Colossians, which is where we're going to go, we're just going to take a really short passage from it, but it is what we call a prison epistle. And what that means is that Colossians was a letter that Paul wrote while he was in prison. And just before Christmas, I read an article about I'm not even sure how old she was. I think she was in her late 20s, woman who was arrested for some things that she did. And she was sent to jail, to a remand center, while her trial was coming up. The problem in this case was that she had some developmental difficulties, which meant that her mind was at about a grade 1 level, about 6 years old. And so she's placed in this prison atmosphere. She really doesn't understand why she's there. It's not that she didn't do the crime. It's really that she wasn't responsible for the crime because of her mental difficulties. And so she's placed in this really rough environment where she has to try to survive now until somebody can get her out. And it doesn't take long for the other inmates to realize that this girl shouldn't be there. This isn't the type of person that comes through the center. And so as she was there, and she ended up being in jail for a month, as she continued to be there, certain other inmates would come up alongside of her and take care of her and make sure she got through the day, that she did right things. They guided her and helped her until finally they convinced a judge that really this person shouldn't be there in the first place. So I was reading the story, I was thinking about Paul. And Paul was in jail, but he wasn't in a jail as we would understand it. He wasn't in some building downtown where, you were thrown into a cell and given a cot and brought meals and all the rest of it, the way that we imagine, I'm assuming, unless you've been in jail. A few of us have. You just don't quite, that's the way jail is. Three meals and a cot, and, you serve your time. That wasn't the kind of jail that Paul was in. Paul was often under house arrest, which meant he was in a house with a guard, usually chained to him. And there were no meals. If Paul wanted to eat, somebody on the outside had to take care of him. Somebody on the outside had to bring him food and drink. Pass it through the window. Otherwise, he just would go without. And there's very little that he could do about the situation. He can, he is in there until some judge decides that he can be let go. And so he survives, and he writes letters. We have a few of them that have been passed down to us, and we call them his prison letters. But he probably wrote an awful lot more than that. And he sent them out to the churches. And one of them was a prison letter to the church in Colossae. Now you have to understand that the Colossian church was new. It was fairly fresh. And so Paul was a little bit worried. Colossae was in decline. It was not a important city. It had been an important city. But for decades now, it had been in decline. And its importance was getting less and less. It was also known for the fusion of beliefs. In other words, it could take several beliefs and fuse them into one. And it had a fairly active angel cult happening within the town. They said that the archangel Michael had brought healing water up through a fissure in the ground. And so they worshipped Michael, sometimes more than God. But they would combine all this stuff together. And so Paul, when he becomes aware of all this, thinks, I've got to write a letter to the Colossians. I got to send them something. And so he begins his letter to the Colossians. N.T. Wright writes this about the Colossian, about the letter to the Colossians. He says, when people become Christians, God implants into them a new sense of his presence and love. His guiding and strengthening, of his love, his guiding and his strengthening. This sense needs nurturing and developing. New Christians need to understand what's happening to them and how they must cooperate with the divine life that's gently begun to work in them. Paul in prison can help this process in two ways: by writing, as he is doing, but supremely by prayer. He may not be with the Colossians in person, but the God who is with them is also with him. And in the mystery and hard work of prayer, he can help their progress towards Christian maturity. That is what he's been doing. So it appears later as Epaphras. Whether you're a new Christian yourself needing to grow in faith, or a Christian leader wanting to nurture those in your care, Paul's prayer for the new church in Colossae provides a wonderful pattern. So we have a new church. We have an older pastor, evangelist, missionary, and he wants to just write them a letter of introduction. He wishes that he could go in person, but he's in prison and he can't. And so he writes a letter and he gives it to one of his colleagues who makes sure that it gets to this young church. And we're going to pick up his letter in Colossians 1, verse 9. And Paul's been talking about all of the reasons for why he is concerned about Corinth, and he's praying for them and hoping for them. And then he says this: for this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in his inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. If you're trying to take notes, that first word is wisdom. And this is where I'm going to lose you. I'm going to do two things the speaker never wants to do. I'm going to bore some of you, and I'm going to offend the rest of you. But here it goes. We're going to talk about sports, because it's something that I know. But don't leave me just because of that. We can work through this. Just try to stay with me. That's the part that's going to bore you, some of you. The part that's going to offend you is I'm going to talk about a team that you don't mention in, Gentile, cultured groupings. So I don't know what to do, if I just show you a picture, or if that's enough, or whether I need to actually say the name, but let's try it. Yeah, I knew that was coming. I could say that, you know, I wanted to try to talk about the Oilers. The problem is that the Flames have a little bit more recent experience with some of this stuff. The Oilers did have experience with Evander Kane. When they signed Evander to bring him to Edmonton, there was a lot of questions among hockey people about how he was going to play, how good he would be, whether he'd be able to fit in. He had a reputation, and you know, really Edmonton was his last stop. If this didn't work, he probably wasn't going to play hockey ever again, at least not for a professional team. And so there is a bit of a parallel here with Evander Kane. But in Calgary this past summer, a couple of players left, which I'm not going to mention. They decided they didn't want to play for Calgary anymore, and they went somewhere else, leaving Calgary with a couple holes. And so they brought in they brought in a few players, actually, but one of them was Jonathan Huberdeau. Now, here's the problem. Oh, there's Evander, by the way. Here's the problem. Huberdeau was coming from a system that was very unlike the Calgary system. Get back to him. It wasn't what he was used to playing for, and there was a lot of questions, even through the summer, about whether or not he'd be able to make the change to basically Daryl Sutter hockey, which is the coach in Calgary. And it's been an adventure this year. He hasn't been everything that maybe the fans thought he would be. He's been getting a little bit better lately, but it's been trouble. It's been hard to really get him to play the way that Daryl has his players play. And the week before Christmas, there was 2 games against San Jose that really kind of featured the idea only with the opposition team. See, San Jose's got some really good players too, and one of them is Erik Karlsson. Phenomenal player. He knows what to do. And he's got talent, he's got skill, he can do just about anything. The problem is he often decides he doesn't want to do it. And so in the second game Calgary played against San Jose, within the first... My phone wants to update. Thank you. Please not now. In the second game, San Jose was... it took them 30 seconds of Erik Karlsson on the ice for Calgary to get a 2-0 lead. And it was just simply because Erik didn't play the way that he knew he should play. He didn't do exactly what it was that he should do. Huberdeau is learning. Kane has done very well in Edmonton. I think that's the hope of every team that brings in somebody, that they can survive in the system. But Calgary plays a very different, conservative, almost mundane hockey. And sometimes it's hard for flashy players to be able to do that. Now, I like hockey. I like to play hockey. I'm really terrible at it. I can't skate. But this is my game. I played football. Probably why I'm going through so much back and knee trouble right now, because I played football. And I remember playing for a coach that had some very definite ideas about what he wanted to do. I was a defensive end, and as far as my coach was concerned, my job, should I ever forget it, was to make sure that nobody got outside of me. He wanted everything that the opposition did to flow through the center of the field, and the two ends, me and my, whoever was on the other side of the line, our job was to get into the backfield and make sure that nothing went outside. And so that we did to the best of our ability. There's a lot of things that we would have liked to have done, like sack a quarterback, take a shortcut towards him, which I admit we sometimes did, even though we knew we shouldn't. But what we were supposed to do was stay on the outside and make sure that nothing got past us coming our direction. Basically, funneling everything else into the center where the lineman in the center could take care of it. There is a way usually to do something, and a way that is exciting to do something, but it isn't part of what the plan is. And so we get into this whole idea of, I know what to do. Am I willing to do it? And so as Paul writes to Colossians, this is exactly what he's saying. He's saying, listen, it's not good enough for you to know what to do. I need you to do it. I need you to actually live by it. And he writes this, bearing good fruit in every good work, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience. I know it's exactly what you've been praying for God to give you. Lots of endurance and patience. It's not usually on our list. It's not usually our words for 2023. But this is what Paul is telling the Colossians. He says, listen, I want you to do this. It's not good enough to know. You have to do it. I have a friend I talk about every once in a while. I actually haven't seen him for years. We talk over Facebook. But he has given up on the church. And the main reason is because he's seen too many Christians that don't do what they're supposed to do. They do something else. And he's tired of it. He thinks the church has got nothing to do with Jesus Christ and everything to do with, he'll talk about it being a social club. He'll talk about it being, self-righteous. He'll talk about it being all for itself. He'll talk about people who think they're perfect and all the rest. He can just go on and on and on this subject if you want him to. But the problem is he's been in contact with people who don't do what they're supposed to be doing. This is another guy that I sometimes like to read. His name's Alan Brem. He's a pastor and theologian. And Alan, talking about this passage, talks about his great aunt, actually. It's his grandmother's sister. His grandmother's sister was the first woman orthopedic surgeon in the world, I think. And so she was a person of great renown, and she was important, and she took a special interest in Alan. So the family had this wonderful expectation that Alan was going to be spectacular. That's a little pressure to put on a kid. But Aunt, I can't remember her name, saw great things in Alan and thought he could be whatever he wanted to be. Now, his family didn't put any doctoral pressures on him, although he does admit that he had several conversations with his aunt about becoming a doctor. But whatever it is, he was supposed to be somebody of national and even international significance in whatever field that he chose. And as Alan looks at this passage, he looks at this passage and says, but that's not what Paul's telling us to do. Paul's not telling us to be spectacular, to be flashy, to be important. There's nothing flashy about endurance and patience. There just isn't. And he says the problem is that when we're doing our best, usually we're doing the mundane. So he writes this: it is when we are engaged in the most mundane activities that we make the most difference in another person's life. It is when we are willing to play God's system, to love without being expected that we would love back, to loving everybody, not just those we like, to being willing to be with people that we don't necessarily enjoy being with. All of these things are mundane. They're not all that special, but this is what makes the difference in people. And this is what God has called us towards, It's doing some of the mundane things, like being a people of endurance and patience. Mundane activities that cause people to believe and know that we actually are concerned about them. Not just concerned about us. Not just trying to get a leg up over them. But we just simply want to be, I think as Jesus would say, servants. So that they would be better. And we would be better in that process. Paul continues, he says, "For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves." That next blank is just rescued. He has rescued us. And there is a lot of discussion that happens around the phrase, dominion of darkness. It's a good phrase. The dominion of darkness. What does it mean? And they argue all the time. Well, you know, Paul's probably talking about the exile where Jerusalem was defeated and taken into Babylon, and they stayed there for 70 years until they were sent back. It was the dominion of darkness that reigned. Okay. And then some other theologian will come, no, that's not it. That's not it. It's all about becoming a citizen in the Roman, you know, in the Roman era. You had to become a citizen, and that was a dark, you know, long, arduous process. Sometimes you just couldn't do it. Okay. And then another theologian will come up and say, well, no, that's not it. It's all about Gentiles having to become Jews. They had to, you know, be circumcised and they had to follow all the Jewish laws and all that thing. That was the dominion of darkness. Okay. Actually, I think they're all out to lunch, but okay. I think the dominion of darkness is a little closer to home. By the way, the same phrase is used, translated just a little differently, in Jesus' arrest. Here's how it sounds. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay one hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns." Same phrase. Dominion of darkness, when darkness reigns. This is the time when darkness reigns. What's Jesus talking about? Well, he's being arrested. This is not a good time. It's not a time where he's excited about things that are coming up. This is hard. This is going to be hard. He's going to be tried. He's going to be beaten. He's going to be crucified. And Jesus figured this out. He knows things aren't going well from here. In fact, on the cross, he would utter these words. About 3 PM, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's a time of darkness. Had God forsaken him? I don't believe he had. But in the darkness, he couldn't see it or feel it. And the reality is that we all know those times of darkness. They're not foreign to us. We know that kind of darkness when we go into a doctor's office waiting for a diagnosis to come. We know that kind of darkness when somebody close to us, important to us, passes away. And we don't know how we're going to function as we move forward. Those periods of darkness come to us often on a regular basis. Something happens and we're just simply in this period of darkness, this dominion of darkness, a time when darkness reigns. I was impressed by President Zelensky when he made his trip to the United States to talk to Congress. And again, this is an expert right now that is suffering under the dominion of darkness. He's got people that are not going to be, or they're going to have a hard time trying to keep warm this winter. He's got people that are hungry. And on the news, we see more about the bombings and stuff, but there is serious hardship going on in Ukraine. By the way, just a little extra for the day. It's Ukraine, not the Ukraine. I'm old, so the Ukraine, it seems to be what, flows off of my mouth because that's what we used to call them. But I've often wondered, so why is it the Ukraine, but we don't say the Canada? And there's a reason. During the Soviet Union era, Soviet Union put the in front of all the colonies. They weren't under their own power, they were under somebody else's power. And so as soon as Ukraine gained independence, they removed the and simply became Ukraine. So whenever you say the Ukraine, you're hearkening back to a time when Russia had governance over the nation. It's a time of darkness. It was interesting that when Zelensky came, he didn't talk necessarily all about weapons and things. He talked a bit about that. But there's an awful lot of talk about children, the kids. I remember in the press conference that I watched, one Ukrainian press reporter got up, and the first thing he did was thank President Biden for the help, because it was only because of the help of the United States that his wife and his kids, who are in the Ukraine, are still alive. In a time of darkness, they needed to be rescued, and this reporter felt that they had gotten rescue from the West, the United States and Western Europe, NATO countries. Because it's a time of darkness right now. And probably it's a darkness that we can kind of maybe understand. But darkness comes in all forms. The dominion of darkness reigns over all of us at some point. Don't look for it in just one way. You'll know when it comes. You'll know when that helpless feeling attacks you and you don't think you can do anything. And when that happens, I want you to remember these words of Jesus spoken on the night that he was betrayed, the night that the Last Supper was first done with him and his disciples. He said this, "In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." The dominion of darkness might come, but I'm already there. I'm already there. I will be there. I will hold your hand. I will keep you through the times of darkness, no matter what those times might be. Trust me. I have overcome the world. Looks like I lost a scripture, but that's okay. The next blank is redeemed and forgiven. So what Paul does in Colossians is he talks, we go back to the verse we had here. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves. And then he says, so that we can be redeemed and forgiven. So we are the redeemed and the forgiven. It's a message I try to keep to my friend a lot. I said, we are not perfect. I'm not perfect. If you're looking for perfection, that's not me. I'm forgiven. I've been redeemed. I've been lifted up to the Son's kingdom. But I'm not perfect. None of us are. If you are perfect here or watching on Facebook, then you're probably in the wrong place. We've got nothing for you because we're not perfect. One of the churches I like to follow down the States put up shirts for their congregation to wear, which said, "No perfect people allowed." I thought, yeah, that works. No perfect people allowed. We're not perfect. We're forgiven. We've been redeemed. perfect. But sometimes we trip over this idea of forgiveness. And sometimes I think we are too gentle with this idea of forgiveness. Or maybe it's that we're too thin-skinned with this idea of forgiveness. We think that forgiving somebody is about some of the simple things that happen in life. And really it's not. It's about something much more than that. I've told this story before, but let me tell it again. It's to me just such a great illustration of this. In my grandmother's church several years ago, decades ago, there was a woman who believed that nobody liked her, everybody hated her. I guess I'll eat some worms. Nobody came and saw her. Nobody came and saw her in church. She came, she left. She didn't talk to anybody. The church was unfriendly. We'll call her Sally. And Sally just was really down on the church. And I was not the pastor then, so I was on staff, and so I decided, well, I will take a day and I will watch Sally. Not her real name. And so I'd watch Sally, and she came in. I'd watch her be greeted by several people. I'd watch her sit in her seat and be greeted by people who came up to talk to her. I'd watch her get up after the service and be greeted by people as she walked towards the door. And then I went to talk to her and said, see, nobody talks to me. And I'm going, what? I said, I could list the people that you've talked to just in the last 15 minutes. What do you mean nobody talks to you? And so we had a bit of a discussion, and finally it did come out that there was a couple of people that she wanted to talk to. One was a fairly popular medical doctor, and the other was a rich rancher. And these two guys in the church always had a lineup of people with them from, before the service and after the service. And she was never part of the lineup. So as long as those two did not talk to her, nobody talked to her. Nobody else qualified. Just those two. And I tried to talk to her about, they are not the church. They are two people in the church who happen to have a lot of people that want to talk to them. And maybe that's bad. But the reality is that you're one of the ones that wants to talk to them. And they get everybody that wants, like you, that wants to talk to them. You finally see that these guys will be worn out. But to say I'm sorry because this doctor and rancher didn't come talk to you doesn't really, we should be able to get past that, I think. I know this is a little bit personal, but would you put up your hand if you graduated out of junior high school? Okay. So we're not in junior high anymore. That's junior high stuff. We should be able to get beyond that. We're not kids. And yet, we don't. We struggle. We let these hurts fester inside of us until all there is pain, and it comes out in the most annoying ways. And it doesn't have to be that way. We're not kids anymore. We should be able to get beyond that. Really. My sister is the principal of a really rough junior high school. These are struggles that she has. They're not our struggles. Frederick Buechner, talking about the forgiveness in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, comes up with this. But just listen to what he says. To forgive somebody is to say, in one way or another, you have done something unspeakable. And by all rights, I should call it quits between us. This isn't small stuff. When we talk about the forgiveness that God is bringing to us, it's not small. Let me read that again. To forgive somebody is to say, in one way or another, you have done something unspeakable. And by all rights, I should call it quits between us. Both my pride and my principles demand no less. However, although I make no guarantee that I will be able to forget what you've done, and though we both may carry the scars for life, I refuse to let it stand between us. I still want you for my friend. You hear it? It is so huge that it is unspeakable. And yet, when I look at you, I say I want you as my friend. So regardless of how scarred you are and how scarred I am, we are going to get beyond this. And I am going to forgive you. And you are going to forgive me. Then he says this, to accept forgiveness means that you've done something unspeakable that needs to be forgiven. And thus both parties must swallow the same thing, their pride. If you want to get at true forgiveness, this is what forgiveness is. It's just simply saying something big has happened, but my desire to have you as a friend is bigger than what you've done. So I forgive you. And from the other side, I accept that forgiveness. I admit that I have done something that is big, unspeakable. And I accept that forgiveness. And we both bury our pride. Is that easy? No. Forgiveness is never easy. It's necessary. Because the reality is we all do, at some point, unspeakable things. And stand in need of forgiveness. The other thing that Buechner points out is that forgiveness is never conditional. Not true forgiveness. I don't forgive you on the condition that you forgive me. I don't forgive you on the condition that you accept my forgiveness. I forgive you, period. You do whatever you want to do. But as far as I'm concerned, I have forgiven you. I still want you as a friend. Some of the arguments that we can get into as a church are silly. Some of the things that we hold against each other are ludicrous. And it's not just us. I'm talking to you. But our society is built around this. That's why we have so many people that won't go to certain places because somebody might be there. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. God, what we're praying for, is that what you have in heaven would come down here. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses. Forgive us our unspeakable things. As we forgive those who trespass against us. As we forgive those who do unspeakable things around us. Help us to choose that the person is more important than the trespass, even when it's big. And God, we want to show your light to them. That's hard to live. But it's exactly what God is asking for us, from us. That we would be that kind of church, that kind of people. I know we can get torn up by our theology. And people who don't believe exactly like we do. But even on the big things, I think we can forgive and say that your friendship is more important than even that. as a church, I'm hoping we can get beyond even just the idea that we worship a God who loves us, that he sent Jesus to earth to minister to us, died on a cross for us, was raised from the dead 3 days later. And he gives his Holy Spirit to the church to make it able to love, to make it able to forgive even the big things. He has poured himself out on us, and that is enough. And so we go out as a people who will love and forgive. We will be people of the mundane, not the spectacular, because we just want God to work through us. We want to be the people who can make a difference because God is in us. His Spirit flows through us, shapes us, and it shapes those around us as well. I am not a very good prophet. I have no idea what 2023 has for us. But I do know this. God is already there. He knows. And in the darkness that's coming, he will be there. The Colossian church, in decline, the city was, becoming more and more unimportant, would have a time of darkness that was just ahead of that people that Paul was writing this letter to. Just a few years after they received this letter from Paul, there would be an earthquake that would flatten the city. And in the Roman Empire, if you had an important city, the Romans would help you rebuild the city. But if it wasn't important, they wouldn't help you. And history is littered with towns that were simply disappeared because they weren't important and got no help. The Colossians were not important enough to get help from the Roman Empire. But they knew that God was there even in their time of darkness. And so they rebuilt the city themselves without help. God has promised he will never leave us or forsake us. He will be in 2023, whatever the year brings. And he will help us to rebuild and restore whatever needs to be rebuilt and restored. That's his promise for us for a year ahead. Let me pray. Father, we give you this year. We don't know what it holds, but we know what's important. You are there even in the dark moments. You will hold us up even when we can't. You have given us a wisdom that we are supposed to live as your people rather than just talk about. And we are not perfect, but we are redeemed. And we are forgiven. God, help us to internalize that this year. Help us to see ourselves as the forgiven. And help us to be able to shed that forgiveness to a world that is just dying for it. And we will give you all the praise and glory. In the name of Jesus. Amen.
And there's a hand, my trusty friend, and give me a hand, oh, thine will take the right good will down for the whole lang syne, whole lang syne, my dear, for whole lang syne will take a cup of kindness yet for whole lang syne. We'll take a cup of kindness yet for